So it says we are live. So Marc, welcome. Can you pronounce your last name for us?
Fenigstein. Thanks for having
Fenigstein.
me.
I almost said Fenigstein. I wasn't quite sure. So,
Either one works.
so I've watched presentations you've given in the past. We've never met, but I've never seen you with hair like that. You look like one of the female hosts, kind of in a swooning way, said, "You look like Bradley Cooper." Has anybody ever mentioned that? And you said, "Yeah, keep that up. I don't mind it."
Hey, I'm trying to grow into it. She inspired me.
Even
So I'm
more
just
so
gonna,
now. Why the new look?
well, shelter in place. Haircuts are non-essential, so just going with it.
Well, if you grew all that hair and just shelter in place, then I want whatever diet you're eating. So, uh, yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself. You were an engineering student and you had a bent for design. You went to Dartmouth.
Yep. Yeah, I was actually into a combination of art and engineering, and there wasn't really a formal design program at Dartmouth at the time. And I was always into two wheels. I'd been on on BMX bikes since I was 4 and mountain biking since the early 90s, and ended up doing kind of a combined art, engineering, econ thesis on the future of bicycles and coincidentally micromobility, which has kind of come full circle. But yeah, back in, this would have been 2000 and 2001, wrote an engineering thesis on a new approach to bicycle design and sales and business model for developing countries. And then after I graduated, there was a materials engineer who'd come from Lockheed, who was going to business school, who had some ideas about how to take space shuttle welding technology that he'd been applying and try to apply that to bicycles. Asked around at the engineering school, and everyone said, "Oh, you got to talk to Marc." And so he tracked me down. I was in Boston at the time, working in power and energy, of all things. And that was my first little startup, was nights and weekends working on how to apply friction stir welding to bicycle frames. That's now a technology that is used pretty broadly in automotive and in aerospace. It's some cool stuff. You can use some really high strength aluminums that aren't typically weldable. And came up with some novel approaches to tooling. And that brought me back to school for some more engineering and kind of half of a business degree, an engineering management degree. And continued working on some bicycle technology, some ski stuff, but needed a real income and sold my soul to management consulting. But it got me out to California after that. And so that was how I made it out here. Standard 2-year tour of duty in management consulting, and really wanted to get back into making things and building things, and discovered the product design industry. Was able to get a job with a company called Frog Design.
Yeah, that major prestige, Frog Design.
Oh yeah, and actually some overlap with Next, right?
Yeah. We used them. Steve, I think Steve Jobs helped get Frog Design started, didn't he?
Yeah, they were sort of a small consultancy in the Black Forest in Germany.
In the Black Forest, yeah.
Yep.
Steve used to tell me, he even told me, I don't care if the best person in the world is in the Black Forest of Germany, find the best person in the world. And always when we were hiring, looking for contractors, whatever, he'd say, who's the best in the world? Get that person. Like we had Paul Rand design our logo at Next. We paid him $100,000. And he didn't take any guff from Steve either. He said, this is the way it is. Steve didn't like the yellow E, but Paul said, that's the way it is, Steve. So
yeah, I feel like you need someone at that level to be able to stand up to Steve. Not many other people would.
Not many people would, yeah. So anyway, you're at Frog Design. What'd you do there? You were there 4 years?
Yeah, about almost 5. And I was a what they called a strategist. So I was kind of the business counterpart to the creative director, working sort of hand in hand to to develop new markets, new products, find new opportunities. It was really a great education, and in understanding how to apply design, that it's, you know, not just talk about it and look at it and recognize it, but how to make it. And while I was there, a colleague of mine, Catherine's son, said, you got to meet these two guys. I got into motorcycles too. That was actually, so I'd ridden.
I was going to ask about that.
Oh yeah.
Because I heard about the BMX bikes, but I didn't hear motorcycles in there.
That's right. So I started saving my paper route money when I was about 12 for a dirt bike, for a KX80. That was my plan. And my parents were not adrenaline junkies. And when they caught wind of my plans, they put the kibosh on that. And I ended up with a Sega Genesis instead.
That's not too bad, though.
I think that's a terrible thing to do to a kid that loves the outdoors and playing in the dirt, right? No, they were great. They were just looking out for me, and dirt bikes are admittedly pretty dangerous. So I got away with sneaking to my friends' farms and riding dirt bikes here and there. But it wasn't until a fellowship during college, I was in Nepal for about 3 months one summer, and just talked my way into renting a motorcycle. I told him I knew how to ride it, which was a lie, and got on this bike and figured out how to clutch and shift gears, and rode myself up to like a Himalayan pass with views of Mount Everest, and then back down with the sun kind of setting between two layers of clouds. It was really an epic ride. Ran the bike right into a ditch at least once. But otherwise made it back unscathed, and it confirmed what I already knew, that I was going to love motorcycles. But I didn't quite trust myself on them. And so it wasn't until actually my mid-20s when I took the job with Frog, and I suddenly had a pretty long commute from San Francisco down to Palo Alto. The traffic was bad, and that gave me the rationale I needed to buy a bike. Not a fast bike, a BMW 650 single, and very practical. Yep. No, it was the ugly one. It was the CS or SC, the Scarver.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was a wonky, driven with like the ugly headlight and a sort of basket area in the front. Yeah, it was. My friend that helped me pick it up was embarrassed to help me ride it home, but it was a great first bike, and it was perfect for that job. And then from there went to an R6 that had been stripped down for track duty and then built back up as a street fighter. Probably too much bike. My favorite street bike I've ever owned, actually. I held on to it for a really long time. It's perfect in the city. It was an 03. I swapped in an 05 front end. I kind of redid it was naked, so I redid the headlights and handlebars a couple of different times to get the setup that I wanted. But it was unbelievably reliable. I mean, it had 40,000 hard miles, mix of track and street, and living in the city and getting backed over by a Prius maybe twice a year. And it just kept running until finally it was parked, and a drunk driver like really mowed it down.
Oh, really?
And so at that point, I sold it for parts.
Oh, too bad.
But I had it for almost 10 years.
Did you take it up on Skyline and do the twisties?
Yeah, I mean, that was maybe one of the best parts about that job, at least while it was in Palo Alto. Eventually the offices moved to San Francisco, but if you got out while the sun was still up, you could head straight down Arrastradero and Page Mill to Skyline, and then take 35 with like the fog coming over. And it was just a beautiful commute.
Oh, great.
Yep. So
two guys.
Yep. Catherine said, you got to meet these two guys. They're working on an electric motorcycle. This would have been 09. Zero was in existence. But that was when Neil Psyche was still running the company, and it was kind of their first generation of product, which were off-road bikes. But his theory was, let's leverage the ultra lightweight stuff out of the mountain bike world, downhill mountain bikes, and that can kind of bridge the gap between what batteries and motors are capable of, and kind of create this new category. And actually, jumping ahead, I think he was onto something with that category. I think it was still really early and really difficult, but the KTM Freeride, the Sur-Ron, I think all of those bikes are pointing to a really promising space in the kind of play bike area that is just not as intimidating or serious as a full-size dirt bike.
So there's some guy on a Sur-Ron, the viewers will know more than me, on YouTube, who did some small enduro races, 250cc enduro races on a Sur-Ron, and won.
Oh, really?
He was really fast. He had a helmet cam thing going. It's like, dude, my heart is beating watching this. And he crashed a few times, but he got off to a slow start. He was the slowest starter because it was a dead start, and the gas bikes would start up fast, and the Sur-Rons take 5 seconds to boot up. So
I didn't know that.
He had to eat dust from everybody. It had to be key off. And so he ate dust from everybody, but then he goes by everybody until he loses it, and then he starts off again.
Yeah, I mean, there is some real promise to lightweighting these vehicles, and when you start to see some of the curves of how much power you're actually using, it's pretty rare outside of desert racing, sand, national level moto. I mean, for sure, or the highway, right? There are definitely some areas where you are using power, but when you're talking enduro kind of riding, generally you're not actually using it. You need that big engine for that grunt and that torque, but not for the peak horsepower. And so I imagine there's a lot of trails and rides where if you could get a bike down to 125 pounds instead of 225 pounds, you're exactly at a real advantage.
Yeah, and really light single track stuff, it's amazing. So you were saying Zero had a nice concept that was like a little like Sur-Ron is today.
Yep. And they deserve a ton of credit. I mean, they were a few years ahead of us. Neil was, and I, like I said, I still think he was onto something with his vision at the time. But their approach, almost by necessity, was sort of off the shelf. The battery pack wasn't, but motor control, and that category, by nature of them being the first, it didn't exist yet. So there weren't trails that matched the bike yet. You couldn't take it on mountain bike trails, and it wasn't really big enough for the dirt bike trails, which I think that category still struggles with, but they'll get through over time. If you remember in 2009, Tesla looked like a long shot. Only the Roadster was out and wasn't taken that seriously because it wasn't actually faster than the gas vehicles. It could accelerate great in a straight line, and everyone was like, I can't believe they're going to build it with these consumer electronics batteries. And and we thought Fisker was pretty promising. Yep. So it was a different context. Oh, and Mission at that point existed as well. They had unveiled the Mission 1, the first one, the Eve Bahar design bike, but they hadn't gotten to the R yet. And so that was my context. And when she told me they were working on this electric motorcycle, I was like, nah, sounds like a terrible idea, but sure, I'll meet with them. And my reasons for it sounding like a terrible idea was I rode and loved gas bikes. And from a product point of view, if it wasn't going to be better at being a bike than what gasoline could do, then it was a science experiment. It was interesting for the technology, but not necessarily interesting as a product. And I felt like the Zero was a little different in that it was trying to create a new category. The Mission I do think fell into that category. It was, it was trying to put itself up against super bikes, and it just wasn't there. And it needed to be better at least one thing that was important, or you didn't have a business. And so I met up with Derek Dorstein, Jeff Sand, who ended up being my co-founders, and that was the first thing I told them through the door, or straight through the doors, was I went to Derek's machine shop, and it was clear that these were two guys that could design and build anything that they wanted to. And so that's what I said. I was like, if you want to build one as a hobby, go for it. But unless this is going to be better than the gas bikes, it's not a business. And they said, oh no, we agree. and we think we've got that. And I said, that's not possible. Let's take a look.
Hmm.
And they showed on screen, they fully catted up a concept at that stage. And they said, no, the numbers work out. We think it'll run with the 250s. And I said that can't be. And we walked through, battery for battery, energy for energy. All right, how much power is a 250 putting down? And like, what's the drive cycle look like? And what's a lap under a pro? And how much energy is that going to be? And the numbers worked, and they shouldn't have in 2009. And so I had to unpack that. I was like, what are these guys doing differently that no one else is doing? Because the mission, looks promising, but it's a multiple away from the battery pack and power that it needs to be to run with a super bike. And this is also a performance category. And there were a couple of insights from that. The main one being, they had really picked the right battle. Now they picked the right battle partially because they were dirt bikers, and that's what they did. And that was how they, part of how they were friends. They'd collaborated on a couple of projects, but they also rode together, and they rode dirt bikes. And so that was just sort of where they started. But they had stumbled onto something, which is on the street, you can put down a pretty massive amount of power. You have a lot of traction. The roads are flat and straight, and the reason we end up with bikes of really high displacement, 1000 cc, 2000 cc's in the cruiser category, is you actually can use all of that power and torque when you have enough tire and enough asphalt and a long straight.
And enough
off-road. Yeah.
I had a Ducati Diavolo a few months ago, and oh my God, that thing is so fast, and they had performance exhaust on it. It was listed by Wikipedia as the second fastest bike in the world, 0 to 60 time. I don't know if that's true. It's just what was in Wikipedia. So I tried some of these 0 to 60 times, and just getting the neurons to let me keep the throttle open.
Oh yeah, your eyes start to distort, and
everything is just crazy. So and it didn't feel like it accelerated. It felt like it transported you to the future. You just cracked the throttle open, and suddenly you were going 100 or something. But anyway, so keep going.
Well, so in off-road, you're traction limited, and that means you're power limited. It doesn't matter if you somehow fit 200 horsepower onto a dirt bike, you're not using it, and in fact, outside of, again, desert racing and sand, there aren't that many people on the planet that can even put down the 55, 60 horsepower of a 450 outside of a few narrow moments on certain tracks. And so once you start looking at how much power a dirt bike is really putting down on, even under a pro rider and even on a pretty big track, it turns out it's pretty low. The racing format for motocross is relatively short, especially at vet or amateur levels, but even the pro race, 35 minutes. And so the amount of energy you need is basically your average power times the time that you're using it. Well, motocross was a format with low average power and a really short duration. And so all of a sudden, instead of being kind of 5x away from where you needed to be in terms of the amount of energy you could fit on a vehicle, you were closer to like 1.5x, and maybe that's a gap you can close. And especially if your target isn't the pro ride and 35 minutes, but the vet ride at 20, now the numbers work. And that's, the majority of riders, and that's definitely the riders that are paying their own money for their bikes. If you can take that rider and you can make them faster, right, in a performance driven category, in a category that's all about either winning the race or being faster than your buddies, that's something that people will really pay for. So that clicked. And then also that algorithm of, our limitation is battery, and how we find categories that aren't limited is this combination of average power and time. You can start to look at the world of transportation and say, well, motocross is sort of all the way to the right on the Pareto chart, not to be too nerdy. And it's performance driven. It has a lot of brand value, and it's probably the most skeptical customer I could ever imagine. And so if we can win over that customer, I think we can win over anybody.
So you've said online a couple of times it wasn't about a green movement at all. Well, I mean, it's about 90% performance and, oh yeah, bonus points for being green. But most motocross riders don't care that much, or didn't at the time, about being green. Just give me performance. Turn me into.
Yeah.
You had this saying you want to make heroes of your customers, and the heroes is put them on a better performing bike so they win, then they're a hero.
Yeah, I would say that was absolutely the case from a business standpoint. It needed to be that. We sort of couldn't blind ourselves with promises of it being cleaner and greener. We needed to be hard-nosed about, if this was going to be a business, it had to be a better motorcycle, regardless of whether you're filling it with electrons.
Wasn't Tesla green, but oh, by the way, you can go 0 to 60 in 4 seconds?
It was, and well, and maybe that's the way we should have gone, because
I don't know. You built a hell of a company.
Yeah.
It was successful.
Yep. But I think our audience was a little bit different. I think you would find a pretty big swath of luxury car owners that responded to that message, that wanted most of the performance and none of the guilt, and wanted to be able to signal maybe that they were responsible even while they were doing irresponsible things. And I definitely have some of that built into me.
So
I don't think there would have been that many of those customers in our sector. But I would be lying if I didn't say that the fact that it was electric and that it had the promise of being cleaner wasn't a major part of all of our motivation in starting the company. So, it's not the sales pitch. It's not what we thought was going to move bikes, but it was our reason, the three of us, for being there. And I think that was true for most, if not all, of the team members that came and joined the company. I mean, it was really kind of a impossible combination of everything I could hope for in a job, right? If you're going to make work your life, which we did for a decade, it was a product that we all would have been geeking out about and spending our time staring at and reading about online instead of doing our job if we weren't there, right? It was like the sort of thing that we just loved and wanted to pour our time into. It was something that had the potential to leave the world a better place than we found it. And it was with two of the most brilliant humans I'd ever met, eventually 100 of the most brilliant humans I'd ever met, but it was really a special team. And so, when those things come together, something that is super fun and meaningful, and potentially a big business opportunity, and a team that you really gel with. And I'll say, so I met Jeff and Derek summer 2009. We spent 6 months of nights and weekends kind of working together, but also getting to know each other and making sure this was a thing that we wanted to do. And even then, we started the company, I think, officially in January, but we all hung on to our day jobs for like another 6 months after that. So there was really a year, because we knew it was a big, risky, crazy venture, and you want to make sure you're getting into it with the right folks. And I can say I was, even a decade later, with all of the trials and tribulations, and even knowing the outcome, still super close with both of them, and we would work together again for sure.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And so there was you mentioned prior to this, to going live, that one of your co-founders, Derek, is it Damon? I don't know much.
Derek Dorstein is, he's working with the guys up in Vancouver at Damon. I don't know a ton, and I also can't share what I do know, but they unveiled a pretty impressive looking bike at CES earlier this year, January this year. And from what I know of, electric vehicle technology, I think the numbers that they're talking about are possible, not just the performance numbers, but the cost numbers. And I also know that Derek is a brilliant architect of EV drivetrains and chassis and motorcycles. So I'm really hopeful about that project. I think they have some potential to finish some of the things that we started. I think they're adding on a layer that we never got to in the rider protection package, that technology that they're working on, which I think has been a long time coming, and could be a pretty exciting leap forward. Early warning systems. I think there's a couple of other technologies there to
early warning systems means what?
Sort of on crash detection. So
when you're about to T-bone a car, the car's pulling out in front of you at 35 miles an hour.
Yeah, that that driver that doesn't look before pulling out, or the surprise U-turn, or the left turn of the rider coming onto you. And it's not like we don't see those things when we're looking ahead. I think we all develop a sixth sense of looking for the rider's head and what they're doing, and if the car creeps forward a little bit. But it's in those moments of distraction where we're looking at the car pulling out of the driveway to the right, and we miss the guy making the left, coming at us. So I'm not sure the details of how they're implementing the warning, sound, light, whatever, but I know that that's a problem that they're trying to tackle. And I think they've also made some good progress there, just in addition to the performance stuff.
Some of those YouTubes of dash cams go viral, from Tesla, when it anticipates something 2 cars down on the freeway and slows the car down or changes lanes or something like that. And it's like, wow, dude, AI can be pretty good from time to time.
Yeah. Yep. And I really like the idea of it augmenting that experience, not taking anything away. I think that was a foundation of our approach at Alta. It seems like it's similar at Damon. We didn't want our motorcycle making decisions for you, or early traction control. It's actually gotten a lot better, but early traction control was really this like awful intervention that made you feel bad about yourself. Right? Yeah, and that was just telling you like, you screwed up, you ham-fisted idiot. And so that sort of traction control is actually really easy to implement on electric. Like, the level of control you have over what the motor or the rear tire is doing is pretty infinite compared to what you can do on a gas vehicle. But we really worked hard to just sort of enhance your abilities as a rider, and not be like the teacher with the ruler like whacking you on the wrist, but being the coach that sort of maybe gave you a little bit of safety net, or could slow things down enough that you could respond yourself. So and I think you feel that in the way the Alta responds, in that it will definitely step out of line, and if you hold the throttle open, it'll keep coming around on you. It won't stop unless you stop. But we built it to kind of work at a more human pace, so that it steps out, but if you react and correct, it'll come back into line really nicely and gently. And I will say, that I think for mere mortals like myself is completely necessary. If you ever threw a leg over the bike we built and the maps that we built for Josh Hill at was it 2016 Straight Rhythm?
You want to explain what the maps are?
Sure. Yeah, I'll take a step back. So maps have been implemented on a lot of gas bikes. There's a rain mode, a sport mode, a track mode. It's very similar. It's the ability
they call them eco mode and sport mode and things like that.
Yeah, it's the ability to tune the relationship between the throttle and what the rear wheel is actually doing. It's throttle response. I mean, the oldest version of this is just different throttle cams, right? You can,
including regenerative braking. Didn't map 3 when you rolled off the throttle?
Yeah, so
Sort of
we had
synthetic
some
compression.
levers that are harder to tune than on a gas bike. You know, gas bikes, especially with ride by wire, can now do some of the same things in terms of making the throttle response less touchy, or the sort of curve of torque versus throttle position. What we also could do was tune the behavior in off throttle position, so tune the amount of engine braking that you had. We also could tune the rate of acceleration, which is another term for it is open loop traction control. So it is effectively traction control. I think KTM and now maybe Kawasaki have done some similar things on their off-road bikes, where it isn't using a front wheel speed sensor to measure differences in traction between the two and kind of intervene the way some of the advanced Bosch systems are. It is just saying, well, we know that the rear wheel could never actually spin this fast because the bike can't accelerate that quickly. So we're going to slow it down to a percentage of that. It's going to allow a certain amount of wheel slip, but it will keep slipping if you stay on it. So we could control rate of change. In theory, there was like a whole collection of future things that we could have done that we never got to. We had played around with hill hold, which was a great feature for certain enduro tracks. Just a bike that won't roll back unless you tell it can roll back, and so you can kind of ratchet your way up a hill or up features.
So it sounds great for those unclimbable hill climb things.
Yeah, I mean the Redshift was already a pretty amazing hill climber to begin with, and so that was just kind of icing on the cake. But it definitely made a big difference.
I haven't seen one in one of the unclimbable hill climb YouTubes that you see where people are trashing their bikes, maybe because they think too much of the bike and they don't want to
there were
tumbling down the hill.
Let's see, Josh Hill and one other guy had put together a hill climber, a stretched swing arm hill climber, and I think Josh won that competition. It's cheating a little bit to send out a pro against the locals, but yeah, they did pretty well, and that was sort of my universal experience when I'd take people out for rides. It was I would always look for their hardest climb, and preferably one they knew well, because they knew how much they struggled, or what their rate of success was. Well, I make it up that half the time sort of thing, and take them out there with the Redshift, and pretty much universally,
oh, that's awesome.
They'd clean it, and that was a great way to convert.
Yeah, that's awesome.
For folks to believers.
So I always had this point of view with Alta that when I was a teen growing up, we all had like Husky 360s and 400s with expansion chambers. They were 2 strokes. They were just loud they're just deaf in your hearing. And they caused a lot of places to close because they were so, these people hated the noise. And the bikes were great, but they also polluted a lot, so they were smoky. You mixed oil with gas, and they're smoky, and they just kind of gave way to 4-strokes over time. And the 4-strokes were quieter and cleaner and so on. And I just thought, there's going to come a crossing point in motocross where they're quieter, they perform better. And when that happens, and I thought you were getting so close. I mean, it just seemed like Alta went from angel funded 3 guys to 100 people to winning some races, getting in the front row on the starts of some big ones, and everything was going, and it just seemed like the tipping point had finally arrived, where now with improved battery technology and improved all the things you could do, the gas bikes were going to give way to electrics for that kind of racing. Do you think that was going to happen? Did you think you were close? Or?
I did. I think we were. Yeah, I think we were close. And back to that same initial story of, in a specific category, that the numbers can work. I think in theory the technology is there today to compete in pro level supercross for sure. I think pro level motocross and win. I think you can match the weight and power, and I think you can fit the range on the bikes even at weight and power. And what we learned is that, weight and power being equal, the electric is absolutely faster. You just, especially off-road, it comes down to your ability to put power to the ground. And whether it was beginners or whether it was pros, everybody was able to put more power to the ground. In fact, that was that ended up causing a major, well, not quite a tear up, but a change in strategy, because when we did our math on how much energy we needed, it was based on a gas bike. And so we were just able to, squeeze the energy on there that we wanted. And what we found was that because people were able to put more power down, they were using more energy than we had anticipated. And so we did not launch with the range that we expected to, because as soon as people got a hold of it, you can't stop someone with a performance mindset from going as fast as they can, and they could go faster. So we had to discount our range expectations a little bit and be a little bit more careful about categories. We kind of thought from the get-go that we were going to aim towards pro motocross, and realized that we were going to have to reset and find different categories because the range wasn't quite there. But I do think it is there now, in theory, if someone had the will to go after it.
Yeah, cool. So in a couple of these live streams I've done in the past, people are so interesting like you that I haven't gotten to some of the questions from the chat.
Oh yeah, sure.
And so first I wanted to go to on ADVRIDER. Grinch says, ask Mark if the machine shop is still in the old Pabst Blue Ribbon factory in San Francisco.
It is sadly not, and he's close. It wasn't PBR. Was it Schlitz? It was an old brewery. It was Derek's machine shop, Moss Machine. We grew out of that, and so he was set up over on Bryant Street with a pretty capable machine shop. We wouldn't have been able to start the way we did without that. And we were there until about 2015, when we cleared all that out and moved to Brisbane. And that was sort of our transition from an R&D company with just a machine shop to a proper facility set up for production with real quality control and cleanliness and all of the other things that you need. And we had a great burn it down party leaving that shop. With, some indoor flat track and some hay bales and fire.
Oh wow. So Grinch was lucky enough to get a tour. He said he got an informal tour 12 years ago. You were testing Panasonic batteries, experimenting with bodywork. You were using the CRF as a platform, etc. Fantastic view from the tower. Most likely it's long gone.
Oh yeah, that would have been really early then. I bet the tower is still there. I think they're now, like, Hertz or Avis has it, and they're just parking cars in there. It was the last I heard. Building's still there. I
think Hertz is going bankrupt, aren't they? Also, maybe he has some stories of R&D at the racetrack. I was there when Brock McAllister of Supermoto USA tested the Supermoto version prior to the race in San Mateo. Back then, it was still in its infancy. Alta set the benchmark and is still, to this day, one of the best e-bikes out there. And now he wants to know what happened. And a lot of folks were bummed out when they shut the doors. So we talked earlier that you can't say much about what happened, but
I can definitely share some of the racetrack stories. And I guess one of the nice things about the freedom of the company being sold and shut down is I can share the embarrassing stories that we probably wouldn't have shared way back when. But I remember, I think this is probably true of a lot of entrepreneurs. If you knew the rules that you should be following, you probably, wouldn't make it that far. And so when I look back at the early days, there there were definitely some dumb moves from like a safety and responsibility standpoint. I think it probably wasn't until we started building the production era design in maybe 2013, 2014, and we had some real funding that we started behaving like adults and being more responsible. So I remember, and right before I think it was at Cow Palace, there was a supermoto race that used to happen out in the parking lot back there, and we had recruited Drew Dixon to come ride. This was still the very first bike put together with wrapped prototype plastics. It was not yet the Redshift that everybody knows, and pouch cells, not the cylindrical cells. But it was a fast bike. Had 40 horsepower. Yeah, about 40 horsepower. It was a little heavy, but and definitely a little front heavy, but it went. And he took that out, and it was a mostly paved track, but there was one little kicker, and as soon as he went off the kicker, the front end just stood up like 12 o'clock, and he thankfully was able to tap brake and bring it down. And slammed it down pretty hard. And that was when we realized just how fast that there's no inertia to an electric drivetrain, and it'll just wick up at near instantaneously. And so, it'll stand up the bike kind of in a split second. Thankfully, Drew was fine in that case. But there was one that I felt particularly bad about. Same prototype, still set up in supermoto trim. And I hope I'm not stealing the thunder from a story I shared for this documentary filmmaker that Tuck Neary. I hope that he gets his film done and it comes out, but I'm going to share the story in both places. So we had a real interesting potential investor that kind of could have finally gotten Alta off the ground. This is early days, maybe 2013. After 2 years of no income, no investment, we were just sort of all burning our reserves. And a pretty well-connected single investor who wanted to have his guys come out and test the bike so he could know it was the real deal. He liked everything he saw, but he wanted to know from the experts. So he showed up with oh man, I'm suddenly blanking on the name. Mike LaRocca and Kevin Windham to test the bike. And we went up to the Sonoma kart track to do it. And we had our Redshift and I can't remember if it was a CRF. We had a 450. I think it was a CRF. And sent the two of them out kind of as a pair. And Kevin on the Redshift and Mike on the 450. And they're like dicing it up, and you can just tell they're having a ball. And I turned to one of my teammates, Kyle, and I was like, this is the best day of my life. It was perfect. Like they were having, it was everything that we had wanted. And then as they're coming around the back before the front straight, we see Kevin just kind of stand up over the bars and like run it off the track and pitch over the bars, which was not supposed to happen. And we all kind of bolt out there running, and Kevin gets up holding his shoulder. And this was about a week before he was supposed to announce his retirement. And some folks who were following Supercross closely, and I think this was 2013, maybe 2014, will remember that Kevin sat out what was supposed to be, it was like his last or second to last ride. And that was our fault.
Oh, wow. What happened?
What ended up happening was he ran the bike harder than it had ever been run, and it had demagnetized the motor. And we didn't yet have the right error detection built into our motor control to manage that. And it resulted in a stuck throttle. And so it was shoving him through his front brake. He had the front brake locked, and it was shoving him off the track. And so there was, 15 feet of that, of holding front brake while it shoved him off the track. And then he hit the kill switch, and that was when he kind of pitched over and landed on his shoulder. really, really lucky. I mean, we all were. We didn't close the investment, which we didn't deserve to. And I'm really sorry, Kevin. I didn't mean for that to happen.
Oh, that's awful.
We got better, and you know, I am actually, despite some of those stupid moves in the early days, I'm really proud of the standards that we held ourselves to in terms of what we were willing to ship to the public. And for sure, as a startup burning cash, you are under tremendous pressure to get the product out there. We, you know, despite that, we had some folks that with money in the company that wanted us to ship that first version of the bike, and we definitely had pressure to ship the second version, the one that did make it to market, but ship it earlier than it was really ready for. It's hard to figure out where to draw that line. The early bikes, admittedly, were not that reliable. I think there's probably some folks watching this that have had battery issues or other other things go wrong. But I think, you know, we drew the right line in terms of safety. Knock on wood, I don't know of anybody that was hurt due to an engineering decision that we made. I mean, the sport is inherently dangerous and people get hurt, but we wanted to make sure that nobody ever got hurt due to choices that we made in terms of level of engineering and safety. Bike's probably a little bit heavier than it needed to be as a result, but I think that's the right side to err on, especially in the early days.
Yeah, cool. So there's another question on the site. MDC 37 asks, are electric motorcycle industry leaders looking at electric equivalent of the Honda CT125 Hunter Cub or the Super Cub? If we could build a high quality, affordable Cub in the US, we would dominate a ginormous world market. I would ride one and I would invest, ! Thanks for the great interviews.
I love that idea. I think there is so much potential in smaller bikes, whether it's for race formats or just for fun. You know, I think there's like a natural cycle of pursuing performance, and not just in off-road, but you look at street bikes too, adventure bikes, things just get bigger and more powerful and bigger and more powerful. And the customers that started with that grow with it. So, you know, we master our 250s, or maybe it was our 125s, and then the 250s, and then the 450s, and then the 450s go from 50 horsepower to 55, and then from 55 to 60. And, you know, the people who are buying that the whole way along can keep up with it. But if you're at all new to the sport, are you going to spend the same 15 years mastering that and kind of growing up that curve, or 5 years, even if it doesn't have to be 15? And I think we've really limited our ability to grow the market and bring new people into the sport with that sort of singular pursuit. And I think for Alta, it was I think it was a great place for us to start and to prove that the bikes and the technology were what we said they were, and build credibility. And there are no more influential riders than those folks that are dyed in the wool and really live it and breathe it every day. But I think, you know, after that, if we were still around, there's so much potential for the 125, the 80, the 65 class, off-road and on-road. I think there's tons of untapped potential, and it's actually easier with electric than it is with gas. With gas, whether it's a 65 or it's a 1200, you kind of have the same level of complexity and the same stuff to deal with. And maintenance wise and all of that. And electric, I think, really scales down very well and very elegantly. And you have these products that are really just about the ride. And I love wrenching. It's my happy place. It's where I find some zen. But I love riding more than I love wrenching. And so I think there were a lot of things we were worried about losing from the experience with electric, and I'm biased, but in my estimation, you gained so much more for everything you lost. So, you know, yes, you lose some of the wrenching, but more time riding. You lose the sound and the vibration, but for me, I gained back so much more in terms of the feel, my ability to be connected with the machine, with the chassis, with the rubber, with the dirt, or with the road was so enhanced. It was like going from standard definition TV to HD all of a sudden, but whatever the tactile version of that is. So it's a long and meandering answer, but I agree.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about the feel and the sound. I have a couple of stories of my own. First off, there's a comment in the chat. Somebody said, I have an MX, best bike I ever owned, exclamation point. They're still used. Leigh Weitzel said, they're still available used from time to time. You can still get one if you really want to. Somebody else said, I want to look at more electric motion so I can practice locally and not bother the neighbors.
You asked about access. Yep.
Yeah. So one of the things, I was riding my mountain bike to get exercise in the mountains the other day, and it has hydraulic brakes. It's a Santa Cruz. And coming down a gravelly hill, my back brake failed. And so now I just had a front brake, and it was a gravelly sort of ruddy thing. And I was picking up way too much speed. And it's like, oh God, should I just ditch now? Or do I risk a really high speed crash, or what do I do? So I was applying the front brake, but because it was quiet, I could listen to get a sense of the traction of the front wheel. And so somebody who was using one of your bikes in a race said that was one of the things that he found gave him more feel, is with the bike not making as much noise, he could hear what the tires were actually doing against the gravel and dirt. Is that a thing, really?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's that moment on, say, a hill start where you're not sure if you're spinning tire or slipping clutch, right? You never have that. You know for sure. And on top of that, there is no clutch slip, so you really can just roll off, of course, and get started. But also, take supermoto, high speed coming out of a corner. As you get on the throttle, you can hear the rubber tearing against the pavement, and you combine that with that feel of yaw and that feel of drifting, and the feel through your thigh of the chassis to feel that slip as well, because there isn't the vibration coming through. You really are just getting so much more information of what the tire is doing, and that's what it's all about. That's I would always listen to like MotoGP or MXGP and Supercross racers describe feel in the front, especially actually MotoGP. They talk about their feel of the front end and when the front end is moving. And I think of my experiences on the track, and if the front end is moving, like, I've ruined my shorts. And then you get on our supermoto, and all of a sudden you actually can, or at least for me, for the first time, the front end would move and I wouldn't panic, because I felt it early enough, and I felt in control enough. And same with the back end. You just get such a clearer signal, you get it earlier, and that's such a rich and rewarding experience. It's kind of worth the loss of anything. I like shifting too. I love, well, depends on the vehicle. I loved shifting my Honda. I hated the Ducati.
Interesting. You hated the
Sorry,
Ducati,
my Yamaha, not the Honda. Mine was the air cooled. It was a Multistrada 1200.
Oh yeah.
And I found that transmission very agrarian. It was like a John Deere. I learned how to drive standard actually on an old Ford tractor, and it reminded me a little bit of that.
It's funny. I went over to Morocco in February. People listening know this, because Triumph was coming out with a new 900 Tiger, and it was all the rage because it was in the trailer for the new Bond film, No Time to Die. And so we got to ride for 4 days over there, on road, off road, and so on. And on the off road day, I was trying to get used to clutchless shifting, but I was always shifting. And there were pro riders with us, and they were giving us hints everybody was a great rider, but they were giving us little hints and so on. And they were telling me I'm one gear too high. It's a 900. It's got plenty of torque. I'm sorry, gear too low. Go one gear higher. So I was doing that, but I was still shifting a lot, and I was standing up, shifting a lot, trying to forget my muscle memory of using the clutch and just, you know, using clutchless shifting. But I'm still shifting, and I'm trying to go so low on the RPM level. Sometimes I'm chattering a little bit and so on. And so now, just 3 days ago, Zero brought a Black Forest adventure bike and dropped it off my driveway. And I always thought I liked to shift. Don't take shifting away from me. And sometimes my muscle memory, when I come to an intersection, still goes, and I missed the clutch handle somehow. And but you know what? After 3 days of riding it around town and up in the hills and everything, that Highway 35 you were just talking about, I've just fallen in love with not shifting anymore. It's just so great. There's just always throttle there when you want it. You never have to think about power band. It's just one less thing to think about, especially when you're off road and when it's really nasty and you're slowing down and it's the sand and everything else. You don't have time to downshift. It just seems like fewer neurons firing, you know.
That was something Jeff always talked about was, and he's not the only one. I think Keith Code, talks about you have a certain amount of cognitive awareness, right? If you're using it for shifting, it's that much less that you have for everything else that's going on around you. I mean, it's actually easier to talk about it in terms of cars because transmissions have sort of matured more and there's more of a range of options there. I still love going back to a 5-speed and a clutch, and I like it more than, say, a sequential like dual clutch paddle shifting car, even though the paddle shifter is faster. It's kind of like if you're taking away all of those parts, maybe because I have too much muscle memory, or maybe because once you're doing a little bit of it, you kind of want the whole experience. I'd rather just put me in an automatic, and like if it's just a drive, it's just a drive. But if I'm gonna shift, like I want to feel the clutch, because feeling the clutch is sort of part of the experience. And I expected to miss that. But with electric, it's different because you're not getting half of it, but not the whole thing the way you just described. I think you get just sort of pure torque, and it's its own reward that it sort of never runs out, that it's uninterrupted, and you can just sort of stay in that like edge of traction zone, until the world's
it's so predictable. It's so predictable. It's not really dependent on what gear you're in and what RPM is going on. You always have this mental calculation of, sounds like 2000 RPM and I'm in third gear, and so if I roll open the throttle this much, I'm not likely to die or whatever. So anyway,
there's another phenomenon Jeff always talked about, which is especially on the track, you tend to bracket your speed by the gear that you're in, and so you come out of one turn and you really do want to shift to third, but you're going to drop right back down into second, so you just don't, and so you've just capped your speed in that moment, or same in the other direction, and so you find yourself sort of stuck in that bracket defined by your transmission, and that's the machine limiting you. And so if you suddenly can sort of use the full range, you're sort of doing what the track wants you to do much more than letting the machine limit you.
So maybe this is really stupid and I'll show my ignorance, but I wear size 14 boots, and I also don't like putting my toe under the shifter when you're really hauled over, because I'm always afraid my toe's going to get caught and swept off the peg and twisted backwards and all that. And that happened to me on a Ducati last November, and I actually broke my leg. And that hadn't happened before, but my toe caught the sand, and then it twisted it back around behind me and under the hard luggage that I had to leave on for the photo op, and it fell on my leg and broke my leg. So with the Zero, I can keep the balls of my feet on the pegs, and at least with the brake on the right side, my toes on top of it, it's not underneath it. So is this a thing, or am I just making this up?
Oh no, it is absolutely a thing, and this is a little bit of heresy, but I think well, one, I think eventually electrics will will take over most of the market, with the exception of true adventure riding, like the real long distance stuff, just too much energy. But one, I think electrics will take over. Two, I think that the standard controls pattern will switch to dual brake levers, dual hand brake levers, and we won't just lose the shift lever on the left, we'll lose the brake lever on the right. And I think that because that's how I've ended up running both of my bikes. It was a little harder to get used to on the Supermoto for some reason on the street than it was off-road. Maybe, yeah, maybe it was my mountain bike background. Street was a little more awkward, but there are so many advantages. One, I mean, the main one is taking, muscle memory and years of experience out of it. You have much finer control with your hands than you do your feet. And so, yeah, some people are very, very sensitive with their foot, but most people through an off-road boot, with a giant, with ankle protection, are not actually nearly as sensitive as they can be with their left hand. For me, it was the difference between descending way off the back seat and just kind of going for a ride and hoping, and descending the way I do on a mountain bike, where I'm centered and I'm actually forward, even on the descent, and I'm in control of the front. And then the other is, your foot is never caught where you don't want it. You need to get a foot out in the corner. You can always get that foot out. And so you combine that with, I think kids are going to start learning on electrics, bikes like the Stasic and Suron, and you name it, the new KTMs, and they'll learn with dual hand levers. And so I think just like the current generation of drivers doesn't know how to use an H pattern shifter, I think 15 years from now, the next generation of motorcycle riders might not know how to use a foot brake. It'll be an esoteric thing like a suicide shift.
That's crazy. So you're an entrepreneur and a designer combo. Steve Jobs used to say you can tell a lot about a person and a company by the heroes that they keep. Who are your heroes?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Wish you'd warned me about that one beforehand. They're such cliches. I don't know about hero, but I've always found myself fascinated by Leonardo Da Vinci. He's not an entrepreneur, but he was just this incredible inventor. There's a great book that came out not that long ago of all these undiscovered or unpublished writings of his on the scientific method, right? We sort of think of him as this divinely inspired inventor / artist, but he had this incredible methodology before the scientific method was even laid out. He was taking a lot of those steps, forming hypotheses, testing them, going through these formed from observations. So I found I can remember the name.
I'm an earth scientist by background. So
you'd love it. He did a lot of observation of movement of water. He was describing fluid dynamics. It was really, really fascinating.
Well, I've felt for a long time that science isn't just a body of knowledge. That's a portion of it, but it's a way of thinking. And that's quite different than the way of thinking you often see in social media when people, I have some stalkers who are furious at me because I maintain the earth is round. And I'm a geophysicist. I checked. I think it's round. We'll put cameras and satellites and they go round and round. But boy, these guys are upset with me and they just won't leave me alone. So
I think maybe a little bit more specifically relevant, Soichiro Honda, his story, sort of every step of his story is amazing. Whether you're talking the origins of Honda, putting washing machine motors on bicycles, all the way through his very savvy business steps. Initially entering the U.S. market, the Super Cub is an amazing story. The CB750 is an amazing story.
I couldn't believe it when that came out. Just couldn't believe it. So.
Yep. The tariff game with Harley Davidson, where He sort of handed that to them, and it had them focused on these big bikes while
Mhm.
you know they continued into the rest of the market. His hands-on approach to all the race bikes, the Honda race bikes of the 80s, are like
Mhm.
each one of them is kind of a masterpiece, and I feel
Mhm.
like his hand is in each of those. So for sure, he's up there.
So, speaking of big manufacturers, you guys were rumored to have had a relationship with a big manufacturer, and with all, we respect, whatever you can't say. But I don't think a lot of people expected Alta to go away. We're hoping the intellectual property didn't completely go away and it's going to manifest somewhere, because it seemed like you were getting to this point where, okay, it was fragile in the early going, all companies are, but now it's really becoming a thing. I have a dog who's joining me here. He
Looks
likes to
like a
be on
good
my
boy.
lap. Oh, he's
I
85.
had to.
He's an
Oh
85
yeah.
pound lap dog.
Well, I'll answer his questions too if he has any. Yeah, I was one of those people that
Wins,
was that
wins
didn't
dinner.
expect that
That's
didn't
his
expect
question.
us to go away. It felt like we had achieved escape velocity, and it was we had a really scrappy, really tough 7 or 8 years between 2010 and 2018, where we were always walking a tightrope. We were always 3 months away from out of money. In fact, even other entrepreneurs sort of would remark that we lived in the death zone, I think, longer than any other startup, or more frequently than any other startup I knew. But we sort of always figured it out, or our investors came to our aid and kind of kept things going. But it was ugly, it was scrappy, and we were taking on a lot of water. And then with the launch of the R bikes, on the heels of, I think, Josh Hill's performance in the Red Bull Straight Rhythm was a real turning point, and things definitely turned up from there. But it wasn't until we launched the R bikes in early 2018 where it felt like, okay, we've actually we got the product out there that we really wanted to build. The market is responding the way we hoped it would. The customers are telling us all the things that we had thought about the bikes, but we were all biased, and so it doesn't count until you hear it from someone who put their own cash down for it. And sales were off the chart. We were doing 50% growth quarter on quarter.
That's amazing.
In 2018.
Jeez.
And couldn't keep up. And so it felt like we were hitting all the right notes. And at minimum, it felt like, well, even if none of us get rich off of this and it doesn't quite turn out the way we want it to, like, Alta and the technology we've created it's here, and it's here to stay. And so, yeah, it did feel like the rug got pulled out from under all of us, even though you could see kind of the hands coming to pull the rug.
Yeah.
And that was sort of a weird place to be. And I think one of my regrets is not everybody on the team, and at that stage we were 100 people, knew how close to the edge things were, or kind of saw the axe coming. And you kind of keep hoping for the best and planning for success, but the worst can still show up. And unfortunately, I can't share too many of the details of the how and the why.
You had 70 dealers at the time, didn't you?
Yeah, and growing quickly. They had inventory. We had a whole global supply chain too, that had the rugs pulled out from under them, right? They had inventory built up, unfinished goods that are essentially just become scrap, and that they'd made investments in Alta. We had our
direct investors. We had our whole team, folks that at that, you know, in the very, very early stage, I think, so there were 4 of us initially. It was me, Derek, and Jeff, but also a young engineer, David. I think, you know, from there to the first 20, everybody knew what they were getting into. I think after that point, even though you have that conversation with everybody that comes on the team, like, hey, this is a startup, right? We're kind of buying a lottery ticket.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but while you can still hear me, I think we're losing your sound. Are your echo buds going dead?
Maybe I can still hear.
I hear you clearly now.
We'll put away. Oh,
I hear you.
Here we go. All right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you fine. Keep going. Nope, lost sound. No sound.
Okay.
Now I hear it.
All right. I feel like twice a day I go through that. It's work from home, age of work from home.
Yeah.
You know, progressively, maybe it wasn't, you know, the 20th employee, maybe it was the 50th, but there's a point where the company looks big and stable enough that even if you're saying, look, there's no guarantees here, you know, you feel like the expectation is that this is going. And yeah, for sure, the hardest part of the shutdown was not knowing the lost potential of the company and like what we would have built next, which was some awesome stuff. There was, I mean, definitely it was, people got to see our first and a half effort, right? And there was a whole lot more that was possible. It was for sure the team of people that we built, which was just incredibly capable and such good folks. I don't know that I'll ever be able to assemble a team like that again.
Yeah, it's such a shame.
Disappointing them and losing them both. That for sure was the worst part.
Well, tell them to go watch the General Magic documentary. So I used to work for a company called General Magic.
Oh yeah.
And we got the best and the brightest. It was amazing. And we were building the iPhone before the iPhone, but we were just too early. That was one thing. Well, of course we had some problems, but we were pretty early. And then the people who were on the team went on to do all these great things. And 20 years later, we decided to do a documentary about it and enter it into the various film festivals and all that. And we thought we'd lose all our money because who cares about a 20-year dead company? And it's turned out to be the documentary of this year. It's an in-flight entertainment. It's the #1 documentary on the iTunes store. It's amazing because everybody felt the same way. We were doing something so amazing and we were getting there, and then the rug kind of got pulled out. It's good.
Yeah.
So
I haven't seen it. I will.
Oh, you'll love it.
Go check it out.
Yeah, you'll love it. You'll see me on there 4 or 5 times with my
yeah, sadly, our story is not that unique. I think there are lots of folks that have been through.
Pretty cool story though. Yeah. So we're badly out of time, and I'm trying to read through the chat to see if I missed anything really good. My question for Marc: how close did you actually get to having the MXR homologated for Supercross? Homologated is the word.
Yep. Let's see. Derek is going to remember the details of this better than I will because he was pretty hands-on, or Dale Lineweaver. I think we were homologated for arena cross, and I think we were homologated for amateur open.
Mm-hmm.
And that both of those should have been sort of stepping stones to homologation. If I remember right, we were not set up to sort of head straight into top levels of AMA or MXGP in 2019. I think the best bet would have been somewhere in 2020, which honestly would have been good news for us. I think
again, Derek would remember better if we had the distance for Supercross, but 2020 would have given us the time to have the distance. And yeah, I think we would put on a pretty good show.
So last question, you work at Lyft now and you're thinking through mobility for urban mobility. What kind of mobility are you?
Yeah, I'm building their future micromobility system. So most people don't actually know that Lyft operates the largest bike share in the
I didn't know that.
country, and also a couple of scooter share businesses. And most folks are probably familiar with Bird and Lime and maybe Jump, companies that got into like the micromobility craze, and it exploded. 2018, especially 2019, were really big years. We're doing it a little bit differently at Lyft. I can't talk about the specifics, but I can talk about the general because I think it is pretty cool. I don't know, compared to high performance motorcycles, it's a different animal. But
fun way to see Paris, though, I can tell you that.
Yeah,
I rode Birds and Limes and whatever else they had all over Paris, everywhere. It was
really
great. Except the French people didn't like me doing it.
I think stupid fun is the right phrase because there's a couple of meanings to it, but they really are. The scooters are fun. E-bikes, if you've never been on an electric bicycle, are pretty magical. Awesome. Some of the elements of what makes...
And aren't they exploding in sales, just going nuts?
Yeah, e-bikes now exceed standard bike sales in Europe, and they're growing like crazy in the US. And actually, the COVID has
bumped it up 110% or something, bike sales overall.
Spurred the sales of bikes and e-bikes both.
Did you wish you went into e-bikes instead of motorcycles?
I like my timing right now. To be honest, with Alta, we were a little bit early, so we probably would have been better off if we'd started 3 or 4 years later. And yeah, I think the technology is a lot more mature in the e-bike space, but I don't think folks have come even close to what's possible in that realm. Now, the fleet bike kind of stuff that we're doing at Lyft is different because this is about how do we turn 2 wheels into public transit, which I think actually could be a huge boon to the motorcycle industry. I mean, the moment you teach someone how to use a throttle, a thumb throttle or a twist throttle, they've taken the first step.
I see.
Only a scooter is that much closer. A motorcycle is that much closer, and especially an electric motorcycle, you don't have to learn how to shift and clutch. The barriers to entry really drop away. But it's more, is there a way to give people individual transportation, but so not like the train, not like a bus where they have to pack in and go to a fixed point, go place to place without a driver or having to wait for autonomous vehicles. And I think we can. And it's kind of cool to imagine a city dominated by people on 2 wheels zipping around. I think the potential is there. It might take us a generation to get there. And it was always a little bit on our roadmap at Alta. I don't think we'd envision the kind of small scale scooters and e-bikes, but getting to something that is more Vespa-like in function was definitely part of the roadmap down the road. Once we knew we had established a brand and we were really credible, and we weren't going to put our core at risk. The scooter thing could be the Cayenne to our Redshifts 911, right? The 911, make sure that their heart and soul are still there at Porsche, but Cayenne sells a lot of vehicles, makes a lot of money.
By the way, we don't have time for this story, so I'll keep it really short. Steve Jobs had 2 911S's that were air-cooled and black convertibles, and he used to drive them down the freeway at over 100 miles an hour. You'd get car sick if you went with him to lunch or something like that. And then he came one day with a silver Mercedes, and we didn't know what to do because it just was out of his image. No, you can't be driving a bubbly Mercedes. So we told him John Scully just got the same car. That made him sell it. So I was going to thank you, but then we got a couple of really good questions. We'll have to do these fast. When can we learn what really happened to Alta?
Yeah, I see the next one from Brian Haskell, who's been one of our most prominent customers? I'm happy to answer that.
Yeah, that's a good one. And in fact, Leigh Weitzel said that's the best question that's been asked. So let's end at that. What message does Marc have for current Alta owners?
Oh man, how much time do we have? Can we do?
Well, that's such an important question.
Yeah. The first is thank you. The same way I was describing our team members and our investors and our suppliers earlier, everyone who bought an Alta was an investor in the company and in the dream and what we were trying to achieve, taking a big risk, writing their own checks for something that was pretty uncertain. I'd like to think that they got a bike that is all of the magic that they'd hoped for, and that experience of riding it and of riding it makes it all worthwhile. But I also recognize that there are for sure some folks that will have mechanical or electrical issues from here, and there won't be spare parts for them anymore, and they'll have a very expensive piece of wall art or a brick. I spent a lot of late 2018 and 2019 thinking about that, and I can tell all of you, if you're listening, I'm really sorry to have left you in that position. I hope the bikes last forever, but I know that they won't. I do hope that you enjoy the shit out of them for as long as they run. I think the track record for most of them is they'll run pretty long, but if you got the bad one in the batch, you're in a really tough spot, and there's not much I can do to make that right. So,
well, we'll make them collector's items and get third-party parts. Just think of the brands that came back: Triumph, Alta, or not Alta, but Indian. And what's going on in Australia now with what's that classic brand that I'm blanking on? Anyway, fantastic. So wonderful talking to you. Thanks so much for coming on. I think I'm supposed to hit the end stream button, and then we look at each other for 15 seconds.
Well, thanks a lot for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah. Great. And thanks to everybody in the chat for joining.